This week, we continue our discussion about light.
Looking at light literally,
Light shows up naturally in different hues.
we want an experience of joy,
And we create this kind of distorted understanding.
but in our minds, we're reliving all of these things that are not like joy.
Comparison, polarized beliefs. Honestly, we make up stories.
Hey there, I'm Reverend Dan. We are Soul Evolution Collaborative, an innovative bricks and clicks spiritual community dedicated to the intentional evolution and authenticity of the human soul. And this is Truth Be Told 2.0, a weekly series bringing you inspiring and uplifting messages and new ways to look at the world. So welcome to episode 107, Recovering the Light, Hue and Tone. This series is a dive into recognizing the light that shines in us all. In fact, it shines through all of creation. Light is a metaphor for the source of all life. So we thought it would be fun to take a literal understanding of light and apply that to our metaphor, that is our spiritual understanding of life. So this episode, we are dissecting hue and tone. What are they in the literal sense? And what are they in our metaphor of light? So let's have at it. Truth Be Told 2.0, episode 107.
This week, we continue our discussion about light. And honestly, there are so many aspects of light that I'd never thought about before. Each of these aspects, understood from both a physical and metaphysical perspective, can shed more light, understanding, on the truth of our own light. So today we are talking about hue and tone. Now, this is a simplified definition, but hue can be defined as the purest form of any color. And so for our purposes here, the purest form of light. And tone is understood as a mixed form, creating a shade of that color or color of light. As we have talked about in previous weeks, there are so many things in our experiences that serve to block our awareness of the light. Notice I said not block the light, because that is always present. We know that to be true, but the things that serve to get in the way of us fully understanding that which is inside of us, the light. So what does this block look like within the conversation of hue and tone? As we explore and interact with the world around us, we see that light shows up naturally in different hues, diverse expressions, vibrant and textured. But we're often taught inaccurate things about these different hues, and we create this kind of distorted understanding, comparison, polarized beliefs, and honestly, we make up stories. Then we live from these stories. They impact our thoughts, our interactions, our relationship to one another. We then begin to create experiences made up from these distorted perspectives, and it impacts everything. I mean, we are seeing this being actualized in our world as we speak right now. The perpetuation of the us versus them mentality, the my way is the only way belief system. And when we follow the trajectory of this belief, we lose sight of the reality that we are all individualized expressions, tones, mixtures of our experiences, perceptions, hopes, fears, thoughts, beliefs. We seek to color the light in the areas that we may not understand, in the experiences that we can't relate to, in those folks that we think we can't possibly have anything in common with. And then we call our experience truth. And in doing so, we mask reality, covering the truth of the light and all its expressions. But all is not lost. Next, we will talk about how we can shift and recover the light, embracing all its many expressions.
We are setting aside the 31 days of December to honor and celebrate the light, that which animates and sustains life. Each and every evening of the month, the Soul Evolution Collaborative will be live online on Facebook and YouTube to lead the community and all those participating in a few short moments of recognition and celebration of the many ways in which the light shows up in our lives. For more information, go to soulevolutioncollaborative.org/events. Let's recover the truth about light when it comes to hue and tone. I love this metaphor, looking at light literally and then translating the aspects of light to our spiritual understanding of the world. It really illuminates the nature of the world and our relationship to it. So, just like brightness and intensity from last episode, hue and tone offer some clarity to our understanding of the world and how we can shine more accurately within it. So, what even is hue or tone in this metaphor? Well, let's start with the literal understanding first. If you are working with paint or even light, hue is the pure color, like the rainbow, the colors that exist naturally all on their own. Blue or red, for instance. And understanding these pure colors is critical because it lets us create other colors. You mix red and blue, you get purple. You mix blue and yellow, you get green. Now you mix a little more yellow, and then you get a lighter green, right? You mix a little more blue into that red and blue mix, and you get a deeper, darker blue. Purple. We get different shades of color when we mix these hues together. Now this is tone. It's the shading, the mixing of hues to create something new. And this is exactly what we do in life. We mix together the naturally occurring hues of life that shine in the world in really so many different kinds of ways. And we get unique and beautiful and sometimes messy and murky tones and shades of life. But just like with light or paint, it does take that certain understanding of the nature of the hues that we are talking about before we really understand how this kind of works, right? So you may have heard us talk about the creative process before, and that is exactly what is being described here. Universal principle at play. Thoughts and beliefs get acted upon by the creative aspects of the universe, and the corresponding experience is what shows up. So the simple version of this is probably seed, soil, plant. You plant a seed, the creative process of growth and germination occurs, and poof, you have that plant. Well, in our metaphor here, the same thing happens. You want green, you mix blue and yellow, we have a thought, a desire, right? I want green. So we do the thing that is going to create the color green. And we know what creates green because there is this naturally occurring principle that has been proven that blue and yellow make green. So you mix the two hues and bam, green. Seems pretty clear and simple, right? But here in our metaphor, what happens is a whole other thing that plays out in our understanding of life. And yet it's the same exact thing, right? We say we want an experience of green, whatever that means. Maybe it's an experience of joy. So we know we have to combine thoughts, beliefs, actions that are both the blues and yellows of life, right? And so we move to create an experience that would be mixing together both the blue and the yellow thoughts and actions, whatever those may be. But what happens is we think and say blue and yellow thoughts and actions, but actually we throw in some of these kind of reds or even other previously mixed shades and tones and colors, right? We say we want an experience of joy, but in our minds, we're reliving all of these things going on for us right now that are not like joy. And so we say we want this color, but we mix in all of these other shades, all of these other stories and things that we've created about life, how we understand it. So we understand the creative process, but we aren't necessarily recognizing the nature of our own light to the extent that we see which colors we're actually mixing together. And so we misunderstand, we misrepresent our thoughts, our beliefs, that which is getting mixed in with this naturally occurring principles of creation. And we can end up with some pretty funky tones. And honestly, creating in this way is actually totally fine and perfect. In fact, it feels like some of the biggest whoopses Whoopses? Whoopses. Let's go with whoopses. Some of the biggest whoopses can turn into these really great and enjoyable, unexpected scenarios. You know, and in life, we say we want green, and sometimes we end up with lavender. And we can either get upset about it or not, right? But here's the thing. If we are to mix lights and we end up with a color different than the one we set out to make, we just kind of adjust the lights that we're mixing, right? There's no emotion or story attached to it. We're just mixing the lights. And so I think that this is the key to uncovering the truth about hue and tone. Really, we have to learn to play with the lights that exist in our world around us. We have to have a clear understanding of their true nature, the nature of those lights, of the hue that exists naturally. We need to learn to remove these false stories and beliefs about the many diverse and beautiful ways that those lights show up. You know, we need to see the pure hue of the many colors, this diversity of life that is naturally occurring. Then, with this new kind of uncovered experience and understanding, we can accurately create the tones of the experience that we do desire, ones that are not accidental, but intentional.
I have so many thoughts.
Yeah.
I have so many thoughts about this. You know, when we were kind of talking about breaking up light into the different sort of like scientific sort of aspects, I was like, oh, where are we going to go with that? But it's like the more that we explore it, the more it's like a perfect, like,
Oh, yeah.
metaphor. You know, in spiritual communities often, and even outside of spiritual communities, we talk about the light, or, you know, don't cover your light, or shining bright, you know, those sorts of things. And that's amazing, and that's great. And
Feels so good.
it feels, and it is good. It's great.
Yeah.
And then there's
Yeah.
so many things underneath it that actually support that. And so I think that's what this conversation has brought to light. You know, even this idea that I introduced some of the challenges in this hue and tone sort of thing, is that we had this idea of this is the truth, and it's often the one that supports our own belief system. This is the truth, and this is what it is, and then everyone else is just kind of like this dim version, you know. And so it's interesting
Yeah.
to understand that when you understand principle, so when you understand that there is this light within us all, it exists exactly the same within us all, and then our experiences and our beliefs and our thoughts and the things that we put our attention to create this sort of individualized sort of expression of it in the world, in whatever it is ours to do in the world. And so it's really interesting when we can understand that. Like, first you have to understand the principle of it first, right?
Yeah.
And then when we understand that, then we can recognize that someone else's experience and how they show up in the world is not maybe how I show up, but it's no less valuable, because it is a culmination of their experiences, their own sort of uncovering and recovering of their own light, their own process.
Yeah.
And so it really does allow, for me, it creates a little bit more space to be a little bit more expansive in how we view others and how we view our own like beliefs, and really creating this world where we care for one another, where we support one another, where we uplift one another, where we create this world that we want to live in. And I think you can't do that without understanding kind of the thing that we're talking about today.
That is the most fascinating part about this episode's topic for me, hue and tone, because it's really highlighted for me what happens when we misunderstand the nature of life and call it something different than what it is.
Yeah.
Like, it just made it so obvious, like there's some sort of conscious agreement, right, to like be here in this experience as life, as people in the world of matter and time and space, right? Like there's some sort of, you know, universal agreements that take place, or whatever we want to call them, that like, yeah, I am here in this experience. And I think part of that is taking on being a certain hue so all of the hues make up, like if you mix all light together, it is white light, right?
Right.
So I think like that pure light is showing up in these different ways, because that's the point of this experience, is to know what is life like. You know, if everything's just white light, there's no mixing, there's no shades, there's no experience, right? I think the shades are the experience. The shading is the point of being here, right?
Right.
And so if we each show up as the unique hue that we are, then we get to like shine at each other and bounce off each other and mix together and shade and tone and all this really beautiful stuff. But I don't think we necessarily understand that until we do it like all wonky and backwards, and we get mad at like the other light. Like, stop putting your light in my light. Get out of here.
Yeah. Get your light out of my eyes.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
and we're all. And what's interesting about kind of that description of it too is that it's not like I'm a little light over here separate from the thing. You know, that all of it is connected to the thing, and I think that is, you know, and we talk about sometimes we don't have this figured out. You know, we're just engaging in a conversation about it. I mean, I think that we, especially in trying to, you know, be in these sorts of conversations. I mean, just the other day, we recognized some of our own stuff that comes up like, oh, wow, I do have my own story that I've created about that sort of belief, or I have my own story that I've created about that sort of group of people. And it's interesting. And that's not to make, you know, that wrong per se, but it is, I think that we are called to, in this participation of this kind of light and this experiment of life, as you called it, to continually look at those things of, oh, wow, I have a bias or whatever in this area, or a story that I have created through the creative process. I have created this story and I have lived from that story for ever. And now it's showing up this way. What's really amazing about the creative process is that we can always begin again in the creative process. We can always, each point, each moment is a start in the creative process.
Yeah.
And so when we become realizing that space that we've been living from, that's like maybe less than we want to, boom, instant, start a creative process. Now, okay, how can I create something different? How can I begin to look at something differently? Yeah. And so I think that is kind of cool about the creative process, right? It's always going on. We always have the opportunity. And so I think that the more we have these conversations, the more that we can become aware of our own little blips, our own little blocks, our own little stories that we have created and are living from, right? Because that's what we're experiencing now. All the stories that we've created, we're living them now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I do recall vividly the conversation from the other day.
Because it was like a 3-hour conversation.
Yeah, probably. Seriously. But what was interesting about it was, because we are safe, I think I can say this confidently, that we feel safe enough with each other to share, like to go to those places and share openly, knowing that we're not going to receive judgment for it. And just like, oh man, yeah, I do have this thought about this, whatever, this belief about them, whoever they are,
whoever them are.
Yeah. And the interesting thing was it helped me realize it's not that we shouldn't have bias or don't or can't, right? Like everybody has bias towards something.
Yeah.
What it helped me realize was just how important it is to realize the bias.
Bingo.
And it wasn't that I hadn't realized it before, but it was like, oh, in like naming it so clearly and speaking it out loud, like being in a place of safety enough where there's not shame in saying the thing. It's like, oh, okay, so I can heal the shame I have around having that belief, and then recognize that I don't have to act on that belief. It was a political thing, right? And it was like, I have this thought and they have this thought, and obviously they are wrong, right?
Obviously.
And it was like, I recognize, like I so had the bias that I recognized, like I didn't even want to not view them as wrong. It was like, oh man, that's that feels rough. To realize, like, oh yeah, not only do I have the bias and the belief, but I have a belief about that belief, that
Mm.
my identity as a person of progress can't not hold, right. It was like, oh
Very progressive.
Jesus,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and isn't that what keeps, I think we talk about, even in, you and I have talked about this, part of what we are, building with each other, not just us, but like the community that is Soul Evolution Collaborative and the people that we come in contact with, that we are all building together this space where we can invite those conversations. I
Yeah.
think historically, and this is not true across the board, but historically there have been some conversations that are kind of like you leave outside the church doors or the center doors and then we
Yeah.
walk in.
Yeah.
Because we have one, just what you pointed out, we have like shame around these thoughts that we actually have these biases and we feel ashamed, and we can't take this shame into a spiritual community because no, we got to show up like whatever. We can't
Yeah.
take the shame. And so what happens is we bury that shame, we bury those thoughts, we bury whatever, and then we can never look at it. It just gets pushed down, pushed down, pushed down. And so when we can create spaces where we can even say, I have this thought, I have this bias, and I have some shame around this. When we can actually do that, then it becomes like this kind of clearing of the wound, right?
Yeah.
And healing of it. I think that's the beauty of spaces like this, that we're never going to heal things. We're never going to begin to create new stories if we can't deal with what has underlied the old stories, and a lot of it is some of that shame and blame and things like that.
And
And
talk
being
about
able,
uncovering a
yeah,
covered
for
wound.
real.
A wound that stays covered all the time doesn't heal, right? And so the same thing for our thoughts and our beliefs and our
Right.
stories and all that. Yeah. So talk about shading, creating a certain shade that, like, man, I really like this shade. I really like the color of this shade. I don't like what we have to mix together to get it.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, it takes that, like, that weeding, that picking apart, and I think the takeaway for me was I don't have to make myself wrong for having the belief. I do feel responsible for working through why I have that belief and what I'm going to do next, knowing that I have that belief. But it almost immediately, I felt like self-empowered in a way where I
Yeah.
don't have to act on that belief, because in the situations where I may be interacting with people who hold what I see as the opposing belief,
Yeah.
I can now recognize the belief I do have and see it coming up and then not act from it. And that's a
Right.
whole other
And that shifts
ballgame.
everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it shifts your interaction, not only like internally, but interaction like in relationship to people and with people.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it happens. I mean, when we begin to look at those things, it really just shifts everything when we can recognize that space. And so this conversation is, for me, it's just amazing because I think often, we want to bring these conversations into the light. And sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable. Sometimes these are like, kind of like your parents said, oh, we don't talk about that at the table. Those types of conversations, in relationship to like spiritual communities and beyond. I mean, just in general. And so I think that sometimes it's difficult to have these conversations, and sometimes we're like, oh, I wonder how that's going to land, when we think about that. But I think that it is important to create a space where we can have those conversations and it be okay. And I think that when we begin to do that, like you said, we uncover that wound, or that uncover that space, or that crack, or whatever metaphor you want to give it, and then can really put nurtured attention to it, and then grow from that, and then begin to live from that story, that healed story. Oh my goodness! I mean, if I could, like, in all aspects of my life, begin to operate from a healed story, whoo, a head may pop off. But it's like if we can begin to do that,
You
man,
might actually, like, poof out of existence.
poof. I mean, that is like the activating catalyst force, isn't it? But that is exciting. It's empowering, just like you said. It's empowering because we're all part of the creative process, and in every moment we can begin to create something different.
Well, thank you for being here for Truth Be Told 2.0, episode 107, Recovering the Light, Hue and Absolutely love this conversation. I love the literalness of our take on light and the information that brings us, the science of light. And then I love how that's so perfectly, we can juxtapose that on top of our metaphysical and metaphorical understanding of light and how it shines through each one of us, through all of creation. And it just brings so much clarity, which I think happens when you take any dive into any topic. If you want more of this specific conversation, you can join us on Thursday night for The Gathering at 7 p.m. Eastern. Information is on our website. That's a time for us to come together in small group and kind of really share of ourselves, of our experience around this topic. If you're looking for a little bit more of a communal thing, we're building a new gathering, a new experience on Sundays. So the Second Sunday Experience is every Sunday at 7 p.m. and you can join us there also. Information about that is on the website as well. So thanks again for being here, and we will see you Thursday or Sunday or next week.